by the MSFL in conjunction with SAU's Andrews Chair for Spiritual Formation. Each year we bring in scholars and practitioners to invite us into deeper experiences, reflection, and conversation on topics that directly or tangentially relate to the spiritual life. Over the past 18 months, any idea that we live in a post-racial society has been shattered. The tragic events in cities like Ferguson and Charleston reignited smoldering embers of deeply seated division, disenfranchisement, and disinheritance. While it would be easy for the church to close its eyes or to turn its face from such realities, these things are actually an invitation for the church to tear down the walls of separation that exist between peoples and to reimagine how we can participate in the gospel work of racial reconciliation. This is a truly rich social spirituality. There are few higher callings for God's people than to reflect the triune God who exists in a communion of diversity by joining in God's ministry of reconciliation. In fact, it would be safe to say that if racial reconciliation needed to be cut out of the New Testament, we would lose all of Paul's letters and much of the other material as well. This is why it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker for this fall's event, Dr. Christena Cleveland. Christena is a social psychologist with a hopeful passion for reconciling across cultural divisions. She's the first associate professor of the practice of reconciliation at Duke's Divinity School, where she also serves as the faculty director of the Center for Reconciliation. She earned a BA from Dartmouth College and a PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Christena's work examines how cultural forces and social processes impede groups' abilities to reconcile with other culturally different groups, and how individual factors interact with these social factors to allow certain individual groups to dominate others. Her book, Disunity in Christ, Uncovering the Hidden Forces That Keep Us Apart, which I know a number of you students have or are currently reading, received a 2013 Leadership Journal Book Award. And Christena was also named by Christianity Today as one of the 33 millennials leading the next generation of Christian faith. And if that's the case, I have great hope for the Christian faith. Today, Christena will be presenting 2 lectures on the theme, Why Are All of the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? A Practical Theology of Race, Power, and Unity. So please join me in welcoming Christena as she comes to unsettle, to challenge, and to inspire us all to partner with God and each other for God's preferred and promised future.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be back in front of you all, and I'm going to take a moment to pray because we're at a Christian college and I'm allowed to do that here, and that's a joy to me. So even though this is a lecture, I love to start my lectures with prayer and end them with prayer too. God, thank you for being with us, and thank you for the opportunity to come and dig deeper into your word and into understanding the way humans work and how we can be better at loving each other and honoring the image of God in each other. Be with us and comfort us and challenge us. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to pick off from where we left off this morning at chapel, and I'm assuming a lot of you were at chapel this morning. If not, no worries. I'll do a really quick recap, and then I want to zoom through some of the material we didn't get through in chapel, and then we're going to move into what I had planned for this afternoon. But we looked at this short passage from Philippians 2, and I'm going to go ahead and read it again. Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from God's love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. This morning we got to explore just slightly the ways in which we have a hard time doing this. We have a hard time being with each other wholeheartedly, loving one another, being united, and partly it's because of the way that we perceive each other, right? We talked a little bit about categorizing. and how just by categorizing, we make these us-them distinctions. There's us, like spring Arbor students, and there's them, Calvin students, right? Or who are some of the other rivals? Yell them out. Who? I would. Yeah. Indiana Wesleyan? Yeah. Okay, great. Who else? Grace. Okay, so as soon as we make those us-them distinctions, be it SAU versus IWU, or black versus white, or rich versus poor, or Republican versus Democrat, then we automatically start misperceiving the other group. And the one that we talked about this morning was outgroup homogeneity, right? They are all the same. And I gave all of these examples of the ways in which they are all the same. We are unique and varied, right? And this is because we interact with us. And so if someone says, all black people are the same, I interact with a lot of black people. I interact with black people in the neighborhood I lived in Minneapolis for the last 4 years before I moved to North Carolina this summer, and that was mostly low-income, informally educated black folks. I also interact with my friends from my Ivy League college, which is like formally educated, upwardly mobile black folks. And so if someone says all black people are the same, I would say, wait a second. I can think of so many different examples because I interact so much with different types of black people. But if someone says they are all the same about white people, or about Asian folks, or folks that I might not have as much interaction with Michiganders, then I might say, oh yes, they're all the same. Because if I know one of them, then I can just assume that that person represents the entire group, right? And so this is a problem. I talked about how in the example of when I was trying to help a Christian college similar to Spring Arbor become better at honoring the image of God in diverse people, they were unable to see that they needed the richness and variability that diverse people brought to the table because they were engaging in this process. The president said, we don't really need them to be part of our discussion on diversity because they are all the same. They don't bring the richness and variability to the table. But beyond that, beyond dishonoring the image of God in people by seeing them as all the same, these categorizations have consequences in that they can lead to perceptions that actually increase someone's likelihood that they die. And so an example of this is, everyone, and Dr. Magnuson said it again this afternoon, the last 18 months have given rise to the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. And it's really gone all over the world. I was in Palestine last December, and a bunch of Palestinians were coming up to me saying, Black Lives Matter, right? And so it's everywhere, and it's something that's exciting people to really think carefully about what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to care for each human life, not just some human lives. And what's interesting, particularly if you're a millennial, and the good news is not everyone in this room is a millennial, there's a little bit of generational diversity in here, but if you're a millennial, you might not know that this pattern of black men being gunned down by the police is not a new pattern. It's actually something that's happened for years and years and years. And I'll give you an example from the year after I graduated high school. It was 1999 in February, and a similar case, somewhat like the one that we experienced with Mike Brown. There was a man named Amadou Diallo. He was an African immigrant. He was black. He was a black man, and he was coming home from work late at night. And if you have to kind of think about what America was like, and particularly New York City, where Amadou Diallo lived. This is when Rudy Giuliani, the 9/11 mayor, when he was really trying to clean up the streets in New York City. So if you went to New York City in like the 80s and went to Times Square, it was a pretty sketchy place. Now it looks like Disneyland. I don't know if you've been recently, but it's like clean and nice, and there's all these chain restaurants, and it's relatively safe. But it was a pretty sketchy place in the 80s, and so a big part of his job as mayor was trying to clean up the streets. But one of the downsides of that was there have been a lot of accusations of police brutality during that and racial profiling. So the way they cleaned up the streets was by basically harassing black people or other people who looked suspicious. So this was sort of the environment in which Amadou Diallo at 2 o'clock in the morning is walking home from work. And when he was walking home, he was going up the steps to his apartment, just minding his own business, and 4 white police officers spotted him and called out to him and said, "Stop." And apparently he matched the description of someone that they were looking for an armed robbery. And so Amadou Diallo, thinking about these this kind of culture of police brutality. When he saw the white police officers calling him out, he ran the other direction because he was like, I don't want to have anything to do with these white police officers. He ran up the stairs to his apartment, was about to go into his door, and he was backlit because the porch light was on. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, so it's dark outside. So they basically just saw his silhouette, and he reached into his jacket pocket to pull out his wallet to show his ID that he wasn't this person that they were looking for. They thought he was pulling out a gun, and they shot him 41 times. 4 white police officers armed shot an unarmed black man 41 times, February of 1999. So this is not a new thing at all. And it turns out he was in fact pulling out his wallet, and he was unarmed. He didn't have a gun on him. And so all that happened in response to Mike Brown with Ferguson about a year and a half ago, this whole, the country kind of erupted into people saying, this is unjust, this is a problem, we need to address this. And one of my favorite researchers, his name is Keith Payne, was really interested in trying to make sense of how is it possible that these police officers would assume in the height of the moment that this man had a gun. And if you ask them, they'd swear on their mother's grave. I'm telling you, I thought it was a gun, right? They passed lie detector tests. It seems to be the case that they actually felt threatened and thought that it was a gun. And so Keith Payne set up this brilliant study. It's been replicated a bunch of times. He's actually a professor at UNC Chapel Hill, and I'm tempted to go stalk him, but then I'm like, I don't want to be a stalker. But anyways, I really admire his work, and I have kind of an intellectual crush on him. And he created this study where his hypothesis was, does the average American automatically assume that black men are dangerous versus white men? And when they're under pressure, when they feel like they have to make a split-second judgment and they feel like they're threatened, are they even more likely to assume that a black man is threatening, is unsafe? And so he created what's essentially a brilliant study. And what he did was he presented subliminal images of either black or white faces. Now, if you haven't taken social psych, shame on you, you should. But if you haven't taken it, you probably wouldn't know that subliminal messages are messages that are presented to the participant in a study, but the participant does not actually know that they were presented with the message. So if you show something, if you flash something under 200 milliseconds, people won't even know that they saw it, but it'll still register on some unconscious level. So you can be affected by it, even though you can't even say that you saw this image. So he showed either an image of a black face or a white face, and then right afterward he would pair each image with either a picture of a gun or a tool. Now the picture of the gun and the tool were not subliminal. And so they were flashed really quickly, and someone had to make a guess, is that a gun or a tool? But it was flashed not so quickly, it was flashed quickly but not so quickly that they couldn't at least see something. And so they had to kind of make a guess. It wasn't clear whether it was a gun or a tool, but at least they knew I saw something and I need to make an educated guess. And so he said, try to be as quick and as accurate as possible. And he's trying to create this situation where you have to make a split judgment. And people didn't know that they were being primed with race. Okay, so here's an example. He would show a black face subliminally, right? So I'm showing you the actual pictures that were subliminally presented to participants. And then he would show a gun, or he'd show a black face and a tool, or a white face and a gun, or a white face and a tool. And they got 100 pairings. And so he said, just as quickly as possible, just identify whether it was a gun or tool, make your best guess. What do you think he found? Anyone? Yes. And so what he found was that when participants had been subliminally presented with a black face, they were more likely to misidentify a tool as a gun. But when they were subliminally presented with a white face, they were more likely to misidentify a gun as a tool. And so he found that in I think it was 2002 when he did this study, but it's been replicated every year since amongst a wide variety of college students and folks who are out of college and folks who are working of all races. He found that the average participant will make the same mistake. They assume that black men are dangerous and white men are safe. This is one of the consequences of categorization, right? They are all the same, can very quickly be, they are all the same, and that's probably not a good thing. When I told my brother about this study, he laughed. My brother's African American, and he laughed, but it was one of those like painful laughs. He was just like, why would anyone even bother to do that study? I could tell you that black men are perceived as dangerous. And as I've listened to his story, my brother just graduated from Yale Divinity School last spring, and he's been training to be a pastor, and now he's a religious studies teacher at a high school. And he's told me that over the last year, when he was living in New Haven, only 2 blocks from the Divinity School, he got stopped 4 times last year and frisked by the police because they thought he matched the description of someone that they were looking for. And so can you imagine just going about your business, trying to study to be a pastor, and you're automatically assumed that you're dangerous, that you're a problem, that you're not actually studying to bring life into this world, you're actually just a menace to society. And that's been his experience, even though, quite frankly, I'm more dangerous than my brother is, let's be honest. So this idea that they are all the same can have these very sinister consequences, even though they don't, what causes them isn't sinister, right? We're just categorizing, but they have these sinister consequences. Another consequence of categorization is what I call inaccurate meta-perceptions. This is where the title of this lecture came from. Why do all the black kids sit together in the cafeteria? When I was teaching at Westmont College, which is a Christian college, very similar to this one, but it's in Santa Barbara and it's ocean view, so better. But in terms of demographics, very similar. And I remember one of my students saying, why do all the black kids sit together in the cafeteria? I was like, why do all the white kids sit together in the cafeteria? Because if you go to most tables, it's all white students, but no one ever says, why do all the white kids sit together in the cafeteria, right? But there's this idea that there's an us and there's a them, and we notice those us-them distinctions, and once we make those us-them distinctions, we automatically assume that they don't want to know us. The black kids are sitting together in the cafeteria because they don't want to know us. The white kids are sitting together in the cafeteria because they don't want to know it. This is a natural consequence of categorizing. This isn't something that we intend to do, but we have these inaccurate meta-perceptions. So meta-perceptions are what we think they think of us. Turns out that's a lot more important than what they actually think. Right? What we think they think of us is much more important than what they actually think. And I found in my work that inaccurate meta-perceptions have the ability to disrupt unity in catastrophic ways. I was living in Minneapolis the last 4 years, a wonderful place to live, and part of the reason why I really like living there is it's kind of a hotbed for multi-ethnic churches, and so churches there are always trying to build unity across race, or have churches where there are lots of different races in the church, and so you see lots of experiments. And this particular church was a predominantly white church, but they felt called to racial unity. And so they decided, we're going to get together with some of the black churches in the neighborhood. Wonderful intention. I'm sure their hearts were in the, I know their hearts were in the right place. And there's a lot of work to be done between the black and white churches in Minneapolis, because there's kind of some bad history. But what they tried to do, I wouldn't recommend under any circumstances. But I'll tell you what they did anyway. So they decided, we're going to have like a racial unity night where everyone can come and make a friend with someone who's different than them. Okay? So, if you were going to do something like this, and again, I don't recommend this, but if you were going to do something like this, they did it textbook, right? They did it the way that you would do it if you were going to do it. So they made sure that there were black churches and white churches who had sort of ownership of this event. The leadership team had black people and white people on it. They had the pastors of the different churches preach on racial reconciliation and kind of give people a theological understanding of why this event was happening. They sold half the tickets to white churches, half the tickets to black churches. They made sure that there was like a soul food dinner beforehand, and so they made sure that people couldn't sit down at tables. They had kind of bar height tables to make sure, you could just mingle and you wouldn't be able to just kind of park it with your buddies. And so I of course was gonna show up, because far be it from me to watch, not watch a train wreck when there is one. So I bought a ticket, even though it was $20. And I went, and I was a few minutes late, and I walked in, and all the white people were on this side of the room, and all the black people were on the other side of the room, okay? All the work they put into this, and it was almost like there was an invisible wall in between, dividing this room. And so I went over to the white people, and I said, hey, white people, why are you not talking to the black people? And they were like, well, I think it's because they don't want to talk to us. That's why. And I went over to the black people, and I said, hey, black people, why are you not talking to the white people? And they said, yeah, they're over there because they don't want to talk to us. And I was thinking, everyone bought a ticket so they could make a friend of another race. Like, you paid your $20, you should get your black friend or your white friend. The intention was to build unity, right? But these inaccurate meta-perceptions were so powerful. Even though everyone was supposed to come together, because they weren't aware that these perceptions were happening, they were just like, well, I know, I'm just gonna assume they don't want to talk. Every single research study that looks at meta-perceptions has found that they are always overly pessimistic. Simply as a result of categorizing, of making the us-them distinctions, we automatically assume they don't want to know us, they won't like us, that black kids are sitting in the cafeteria all by themselves because they don't want to be part of what we're doing. And we don't ever stop to think, is that true? Or is that true because of something we're doing? We just assume, they're unfriendly. They don't really want to be a part of us. And we never dig deeper. And the fact of the matter is in almost every single study, people have been generally interested in getting to know other people. So they've looked at like Canadians versus French Canadians, or like men versus women, and almost every single study, for the most part, people are like, I'd love to get to know that person. I just thought they didn't want to know me. So we don't even take that step. So this by now, just simply because of categorizing, right? The same thing that helps me make sense of this podium or a chair or a car, simply by categorizing, I've already decided there's an us and there's a them. I've already decided that they are all the same, and that I don't really need to listen to them because they don't bring a lot of richness and variability to the table. And I've already decided that they don't want to know me. And then you wonder why we don't have unity, right? This is all happening outside of our awareness. We don't even know it's happening. The last one I want to talk about before we move on to getting into really the more sinister aspects and that lead into privilege and power is I want to talk a little bit about, just because of categorizing, we tend to exaggerate differences. We tend to think we are so different than them. And this is something that happens naturally, and this is partly because categories help us to organize our world. So we want to have really distinct categories. We want to know very clearly who they are and who we are. And it doesn't help us to have fuzzy categories where it's unclear whether they're part of us or not. So let's do a little experiment. Someone said, I woo, right? Okay, great. It's one of your rivals. Is anyone else, can someone second that it's one of your rivals? Okay, good. Oh, it's like the Wesleyan folks. Okay, I get it. Okay, so what's the difference between a Spring Arbor student and an Indiana Wesleyan student? How are they different? You guys are civilized. Okay. They live in Indiana, which is uncivilized. Okay. What else? Oh, come on. Someone be honest. Yeah? Sure you were. Okay, so no, let's see. How are you different? Go for it, yeah.
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay, yeah.
We have different loyalties.
Different
Loyalties.
Okay, yeah. Different loyalties. They have better sports. Okay. What else? Yeah.
I don't know if this is true, but I've heard one person say that they're more cliquey.
They're more cliquey? Okay. What about theologically? Are there any theological differences? More conservative, less conservative?
We love Jesus more.
They love Jesus more? Okay. So what's interesting is we tend to exaggerate our differences, right? Meanwhile, if you talk to someone at Indiana University or University of Michigan, and you said, hey, compare these two schools, Spring Arbor and Indiana Wesleyan, they'd be like, oh, they're both Christian colleges, they're both small, they're all the same, right? I mean, they wouldn't see those distinctions, but for you guys, it's important to distinguish yourselves from Indiana Wesleyan. And so you want to think about any of the ways that you can possibly be different. Here's an example of how this has worked in my own life. I've lived all over the country, California, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, now in North Carolina. 5 years ago, I moved to Minnesota from Santa Barbara. And I don't know if you guys, I mean, I'm sure Michigan people are somewhat similar, so I hope I don't offend you. But Minnesotans take their weather really seriously. I don't know if you know that about Minnesotans. Is it like that here in Michigan too, a little bit? Okay, so here's the thing. Coming from California, now, in California, you pretty much only talk about the weather if you've exhausted every other possible conversation piece, right? So every, world event, etc. And then you talk about the weather, right? In Minnesota, they will ignore every important thing that's happening in the world and go straight to the weather, because that's like the most important thing to talk about. And they are really proud of their winters and how horrible they are. So when I first moved there from California, every single conversation went just like this. Oh, what's your story? Where are you from? I was like, oh, I'm from California. I just moved here, and it was July. So they're like, oh my gosh, you just moved here from California? Yes. So you haven't experienced the Minnesota winter yet? No. Oh, you're gonna die. Like that was just like, and I had this conversation like 40 times with people over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, and that's just how they're so serious about their weather. And so I remember one time I was at Trader Joe's. Do you guys have Trader Joe's out here? Okay. I was at Trader Joe's, and I don't know if you know this, but when you're checking out your groceries, they're like really friendly because they have to engage the customer. It's like part of their job to be super friendly. I thought they were hitting on me. So like if I had low self-esteem, I would just go to Trader Joe's and like think that someone was hitting on me. But that's not true. My friend works there and she's like, no, we have to talk to you. But that's kind of why I was there. Okay, so I was there checking out my groceries, and this guy who was the cashier, he was like, oh, being friendly like usual. Oh, where are you from? Tell me your story. I'm like, oh, I just moved here from California. So then the same conversation happens, right? So if you haven't been here for a winter, you're going to die. And at this point, I was kind of like ready to push back. So I'd heard this a lot, and I was getting tired of being treated like I couldn't handle the winter. And so I said, well, I did go to high school and college in New Hampshire. So, pretty tough winters there. And he said, oh, it's way worse here. And I said, oh, when did you live in New Hampshire so you could compare and contrast the different winters? And he said, I've never lived in New Hampshire. I don't even know where New Hampshire is. I'm just telling you that it's way worse here. And then he starts talking about how it's a dry cold and it chills you to the bones. And I'm like, well, I went to school in the White Mountains on the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty horrible. And, we had a blizzard, over Cinco de Mayo one year. And he's like, oh, but you missed the Halloween blizzard of 1991. And he's like going back and forth. Meanwhile, there are all these people in line behind us, right, who are Minnesotans. So they're getting into it because they're taking this personally. And we're going back and forth, and I'm trying to prove that New Hampshire is more hardcore for winters, and they're saying it's Minnesota. And then finally, after like 10 minutes, I was like, does someone have to win this conversation? Because the fact of the matter is we've all been through some hard winters. And we should just be hugging each other and supporting each other, and because New Hampshire and Minnesota are so similar in terms of their seasons. And it's one of those things where we want to make a distinction between us and them so we can preserve our boundaries. I don't want to get Minnesotans and New Hampshire people confused, because then I'm going to have to use my precious energy to investigate when I meet someone and find out who they really are, and I'm going to have to individualize them, and we don't like doing that. We like to rely on our group categories so that we can make these assumptions about people. We are so different than them. When really, we are underestimating the commonalities that we have, the commonalities that can bring us together. Now here's where it starts to get especially sinister. We are different than them quickly becomes we are better than them. It doesn't take long, and that's because our self-esteem is super tied up in our group identity. And we are very extremely defensive when it comes to our self-esteem. And for good reason. Self-esteem serves as a buffer. I won't go into it, but self-esteem is something that is very valuable, and we will go to great lengths to preserve our self-esteem. And we kind of have these built-in biases in order to do that. So for example, I teach students, and if a student fails an exam, whose fault is it? Whose fault? It's my fault, right? A student fails the exam in my class, and it's because I am out to get them, right? I am up all night trying to create trick questions for the exam, or I did not teach them well, right? I was confusing. But what happens if a student does well on an exam? Who gets the credit for that? Who gets the credit? The student gets the credit, right? And I don't even take it personally when my students do that, because I know they are just preserving their self-esteem, right? If you fail at something, you're naturally going to interpret that situation to protect your self-esteem. It's somebody else's fault, or it was the situation. It wasn't me. But if I do something that's good, I want to take all the credit, because that bolsters my self-esteem. So that's just one way in which our self-esteem is really important. Now, because we're so interested in preserving our self-esteem, and we're quite good at it, I will say. Westerners have a self-esteem on average of about 7 out of 10. So people have good self-esteem, and it's because we lie to ourselves all the time. But one of the things that's interesting, and this is when groups get really complicated, is whenever I'm in a group, my self-esteem is tied up in that group membership. Our self-esteem can vary anywhere along this line of being individuals or being a group. And so we often think of identity as something that's very stable, but it's not, actually. Oftentimes I'll think of myself as an individual, and oftentimes I'll think of myself as a group member. When I'm thinking of myself as a group member, and this can actually be induced pretty easily, I'm now going to have my self-esteem tied up in my group membership, and so I want to feel good about myself, which means I need to feel good about my group. And there's so many ways in which we do this. I'm actually probably, just for the sake of time, skip over some of these. They're in my books. You can go ahead and read it if you have read my books. But I want to talk about a study that's also in my book that really shows this as well. The fact of the matter is that the reason why we so quickly go from they are so different than us than to they are so much worse than us, or we are so different goes to we are so much better than them, is because the most effective way to feel good about ourselves is by derogating another group. And this study, that's a very classic study, really shows how powerful this is. These social psychologists wanted to see if we lower people's self-esteem, and I'll tell you about how they do that. If we lower people's self-esteem and they're in a state where they actually want to feel, they're actively looking for ways to feel good about themselves. And then we give them an opportunity to evaluate a group member or a non-group member. If they derogate that group member, will that get their self-esteem bounce back? Is that effective? And so what they did is they brought a bunch of participants into the lab, and the participants were either Italian Christian women or non-Italian Jewish women, okay? And they were, oh no, sorry, I'm totally confusing it. They were all the participants were Italian Christian women, okay? So these are women who really identified with being Christian, and this was at a school where, you know, students really want to think of themselves as smart. In general, college students want to think of themselves as smart, but this is one school that in particular they really wanted to think of themselves as smart. So the way that they deflated their self-esteem was they gave every participant in the study an IQ test, but it was a bogus IQ test. And so that's basically when we as the researchers automatically decide who fails and who succeeds at the test. We don't actually grade them, it's just randomly predetermined. And so half the participants were told, you failed, I can't believe you even got into this school, like you must be really bringing the ACT and SAT scores down here. And then half the participants were told, great job, you're smart, you're as smart as you thought, you scored like 95th percentile on the IQ test. So as a result of this, the participants either have really deflated self-esteem or they have very high self-esteem. And then they said, we're going to switch the studies now. Like the first study's over, this is a completely new study. And if you ever do a psychology study, whenever they say this is a completely new study, you can just assume that it's the exact same study, and that they're still testing you. And so they said, what we want to do is we want to get a sense of how people perceive job applicants. Just, pretend you're a hiring manager. Here's a job applicant, her picture, her resume. Here's the job description. We just want you to look at this and evaluate whether you would hire this person. Are they qualified? Even personal things like, would you like them? Would you want to spend time with them, etc. Do they seem like an interesting person? And here's what they did to vary this, and to really test whether people would derogate or not. They had the exact same resume, but half the participants got one version of the resume and half the participants got the other version. So one of the applicants was an in-group member. It was one of us. It was an Italian Catholic woman. So they saw a picture of her. She had a cross around her neck, and she had an Italian Catholic name. Everything else on the resume was the same. And then they gave some of the people in the study, a different version of that resume. Same resume in terms of the qualifications, changed the name to a Jewish name, showed the exact same picture, but in this case, the woman had a Star of David around her neck. So that was the only difference. So it was clear whether she's one of us, a Catholic, or one of them, a Jewish person. And what they found was fascinating. So they found, it's kind of a little bit hard to see at this time, but they found that when the people had high self-esteem, when they had been given positive feedback about their IQ score, they perceived the Italian and the Jewish woman equally the same. They were like, oh, she seems qualified. She seems awesome for this job. There's no difference. So when we're feeling good about ourselves, we're nice to everybody, right? But they found that in the condition where the people had low self-esteem because they had just been told that they failed the IQ test, if it was someone who was Christian like them, they were like, oh, she's awesome. I would definitely hire her. I would even want to be friends with her. But if it was a Jewish person, look how poorly they rated her. They said, she sucks. Essentially, they said, she's not qualified. I wouldn't hire her. The exact same resume. What's even more telling is afterwards, they wanted to see if, wait a second, something's happening. Okay, they wanted to see if derogating this person actually led to, an increase in self-esteem, right? And they found out that it's true. So the people who had positive feedback, they already had high self-esteem, so they didn't really need a huge jump in their self-esteem. But look at the people who had just derogated this Jewish woman. Their self-esteem bounced all the way back. It was actually a little bit higher than it was before they came into the study. And so it works, right? And what's fascinating about this, particularly when you're looking at unity in the church, is that these comments, the ways that they derogated this Jewish woman, it was very subtle, right? It wasn't anything that we would call explicitly racist. I think we often think that if we're doing something that's harmful, that's disruptive to unity in the church, that's derogatory of other people, it has to be very extreme, right? It has to be a burned cross on someone's lawn, or it has to be a hanging or a lynching or something like that. But in this case, they weren't doing anything or saying anything that we would call explicitly racist. no one was saying we should torch the local Jewish temple, right? Or we should get rid of all the kosher food in the diner, in the dining hall, right? No one was doing anything that we would call explicitly racist. What they were saying was, she doesn't seem that great. She doesn't seem that smart. She doesn't seem that qualified for the job. It's these very subtle ways in which we tend to exaggerate the differences between us and them, particularly by saying we're just a little bit better than them. The term that we use for this is called infrahumanization. It's a very subtle way of dehumanizing people. And we do it without even mentioning their name. That's what's powerful about it. Infrahumanization works because we apply uniquely human characteristics to our group, implying that the other group does not also have these uniquely human characteristics. So we're just a little bit more human than they are. And we don't even mention it. So, for example, this is a picture that came out about a year and a half ago. These boys, young black men, are lighting a Molotov cocktail in Ferguson in protest, and they're about to launch it at some police officers. Okay, so infrahumanization. This is the infrahumanization that I heard in response to this picture. We, meaning white people, are responding rationally and peacefully to this event. Infrahumanization is when we ascribe uniquely human characteristics to ourselves. Now, intelligence, logic, rationale, these all come from our higher order cognitive processing and our prefrontal lobes, and they're bigger than most other animals, and this is what distinguishes us from animals, right? We are rational, we are logical. And so, by simply saying, we are looking at this logically, the assumption is they are not. They are a little bit less human than we are, and we dehumanize just like that. This came up again last spring, when these kids were throwing rocks at police cars in response to the Baltimore uprising. This one is pretty eerie because it really reminds me of the Palestinian kids throwing rocks at Israeli tankers. It's a very similar picture. Or this man who looks like he's emerging from blowing up a Maryland police van. Again, people's responses. We are so rational. We are looking at this in a way that they're capable of looking at. Why can't they just calm down? Another thing that people often say is, when they infrahumanize, is they ascribe some of the moral emotions, the secondary emotions, to their group. So I've heard people say things like, I would feel guilty if I had just blown up a police van. The secondary emotions are moral emotions, right? If you can't feel guilt, you're not exactly human. You're like Dexter, or you're like a sociopath, right? And so to say, I would feel guilty if I did something like that, implies that he is incapable of feeling guilty. And so we infrahumanize. And this is why, I think Paul really calls us, really calls us to paying attention to our self-esteem, right? In that passage I just read, as soon as he says, be of one mind, he says, don't just look out for your own self-interest. It's like he's drawing our attention to our natural tendency to want to feel good about ourselves and to want to jockey our group memberships around in order to feel good about ourselves. And so we have these sort of interactive processes happening where you have categorizing and the natural consequences of categorizing that totally misinterprets who people are, misperceives who people are, and then on top of it, oftentimes those perceptions we want to hold on to because they make us feel good about ourselves, and they don't force us to look inward and examine how we might be contributing to the problem, or how we might actually need to think a little bit more about guilt, or we need to think a little bit more about the way that we're interpreting a situation. And so this is kind of where we're invited by Paul to think a little bit more deeply and to say, this is maybe our time to ask ourselves, what's our role in this? How are we perceiving others? The good news here is that so much of this work suggests that if we're willing to have these conversations, all of these things I've talked about for the last 30 minutes or so are things that happen outside of our awareness. And they have their power because we're not aware of them, right? We tend to just assume they don't want to know us. We just tend to assume that we're a little bit better than them. But as soon as we have this conversation and we bring it into conscious awareness, we can actually start to correct for those differences. And the study I showed with the guns and the tools, Keith Payne found that when people were aware of their bias and were motivated to override it, they were able to do that. But it takes awareness and it takes motivation. And so many of us are not even in a place where we're even aware. So many of us are not even in a place where we're willing to say, you know what, I have some of those biases, and I've been a part of a world that perpetuates those biases, even if I haven't meant to. And I think this is an opportunity here. I want to close this afternoon with talking a little bit about the way that I think Paul gives us an insight into how to fix this, right? So, or at least be part of the solution. We can't really fix it, only Jesus can fix it, but we can certainly be part of what Jesus is already doing. And the good news is, Paul goes on and he says, okay, you need unity, you need to be looking out for, you need to pay attention to the way your self-interest can get in the way of that unity. However, he gives us a clue as to what to do next. And he says, you must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. I love this passage because it's showing that Paul has a sociological imagination and that Jesus had a sociological imagination. And when I think about this, I look at it and I say, wow, Paul is inviting us, saying the answer to unity is following in Jesus' footsteps. And what did Jesus do? Jesus was in this amazing Trinitarian love bubble, right? Where everyone got along and they had equality and mutuality and they were, Jesus didn't have to deal with the things that we deal with. Jesus didn't have to deal with sickness, puberty, awkwardness, any of the things that we deal with. But Jesus did not cling to that. Though he was God, he thought about who he was relative to us and realized that he had more power than we did, and he came down to us. And this is what the incarnation is all about. Now, what's interesting about this, though, is this gives us an opportunity to think about the ways in which we have power relative to other people. And I can start with my own example. I'm someone who, this is so funny because when I was a professor last year at Bethel, I would talk to my students about this and they would get kind of mad. So maybe you guys will get mad too, and then it's great we can have a conversation about it. But I think about this and I think, wow, I benefit from a lot of things in our society. We live in an unequal world and it's mostly good for me. And all the things that are good for me come at the expense of other people. So for example, I get to go all over the world and speak, and people like to listen to me, and people read my books and my writing, and people always want to know what I think about things, and I get paid to go to different places. And the fact of the matter is I just moved from a neighborhood in North Minneapolis, a predominantly Black, low-income neighborhood, and my neighbors have astute observations about society, about race, about faith, and nobody ever invites them to come speak. Nobody ever wants to know what they think about a TV show or what they think about a current event. No one ever wants to give them a book contract. No one even wants to notice them. And And when I talked to my students at Bethel about this, they'd often say, but Dr. Cleveland, you earned your influence. You got a PhD, you wrote that book, you worked hard, you deserve everything that you have. You deserve to have more of a voice than your neighbors. You deserve to be taken more seriously than your neighbors. And this whole conversation brings up this reality that when it comes to unity and disunity in our world, it's not as simple as I misperceive you and you misperceive me. Because the fact of the matter is, I misperceive you and I have a whole lot more power than most people in our society. And my misperceptions have a platform. I can write a blog post about it, I can share it with the world, I can spread my ideas, and it's not the same way back and forth. And my students would say, they would fight me on this, and they would say, no, you deserve to have more power. And I would say, no, not really, because the fact of the matter is, I grew up in a family where, okay, let me tell you about my family. So, you'll understand. My parents care about two things, Jesus and education. That's pretty much it. So my dad went to Yale and his brother went to Princeton. And so they decided to raise their kids in a very specific way. So we started studying for the SATs when I was in first grade. You guys take the ACT here? Okay, it's like this. It's like the ACT. Okay, you take both. Well, I took the SAT. So we started studying when I was in first grade. So we were already in the accelerated classes because my parents made sure that we got to the accelerated classes. So I had to stay an extra hour after school anyway in first grade to do reading, special reading group. Then I'd come home and I'd do my homework, and then I'd have an hour and a half of reading comprehension exercises and analogies exercises and SAT prep. I didn't know I was studying for the SATs until like 10 years later when I took the SATs, and I was like, this is all remarkably familiar. And it's because I've been training my whole life for this, okay? And my parents also lied to us, and if I ever have kids, I will absolutely do the same thing. They told us that in the summer, everything was closed but the library. And so they were like, school's closed, ice cream shop closed, mall closed, movie theater closed, but the library is open. So and we believed them. And so we, every day, would get up, eat our breakfast, my mom would pack a lunch, we'd spend the whole day at the library reading, doing the little activities they have in the library, little enrichment activities, and we'd come home for dinner, and it wasn't until after dinner that we would get to play with our friends in the street. So our whole day was about going to the library. And then my parents wanted us to be cultured, and so we had season tickets to the San Francisco Ballet, Opera, and Symphony. And every 2 weeks we'd get all dressed up and we would go out to these events. And so my first concert was a Leontine Price concert. And many of you probably don't know who that is, but she's a famous black opera singer. And so all my friends were going to the Michael Jackson Thriller concert, and I was like at Leontine Price, learning about opera. When I was in third grade, my parents signed me up for Saturday Academy at UC Berkeley. And so every Saturday morning from 8 till 3, I took the BART up to Berkeley, the BART train to the Berkeley campus, and I would walk up the hill to the science building, and I'd be in science classes all day. And all of the classes were taught by students of color at Berkeley. And so I was, even then, getting accustomed to being on a college campus. I was getting accustomed to seeing people who looked like me, working their way around the lab and looking like they belonged. And I was like, yeah, this looks like something I can do, college. And my dad wanted us to go to Ivy League schools, so every night at dinner we'd have to recite the 8 Ivy League schools so that we would know where we were going. And we had Yale everything in our house. Okay, we had Yale pajamas, Yale toothbrushes, Yale blankets, Yale bumper stickers, Yale mugs, everything said Yale, Yale, Yale Bulldogs, okay? So that was the home that I grew up in. And when I was 15, my parents sent me off to boarding school, and to a school where 40% of my classmates went to Ivy League colleges. Everybody else went to good schools like Stanford and Duke and Amherst College and Georgetown. And when I got my college acceptance letters and I ended up going to Dartmouth, it was like I fell into Dartmouth. It was like I was Dartmouth bound from the moment I was conceived. Because in every way, that I had support towards my academic goals. Well, let me rephrase that. Every way that I did work hard towards my academic goals, I had support at every single step. And my cousins and my siblings too, and so if you look at the Cleveland family, it worked. So my brother just got his MDiv from Yale. I went to Dartmouth and then got my PhD at University of California, Santa Barbara. My sister went to Oberlin College. She's the artsy one, so she went to like the best art school. And then my cousins, I have 3 of them. One graduated from Harvard undergrad last year. The other one's a junior at MIT, and the other one's a sophomore at Princeton. And those are the Clevelands, like that's the Cleveland family. And so when you have all of that support, when you have all of those resources supporting your goals, you're going to fall into places that we went, like the ones that we went to. Now the thing that's interesting about it is people say, but Christina, you worked really hard for that. And I'm like, yeah, I did. I was there for the all-nighters. I wrote my 170-page dissertation. Like, sure, I did work hard for it. But I have friends in my neighborhood in Minneapolis who have all of the values, all of the goals, all of the desires, all of the work ethic that I have had, but in every single way that my journey was supported by my family's upwardly mobile income and the resources that were available to us, their journey has been thwarted by the school-to-prison pipeline, by a lack of support in the home because their parents are working 8 million jobs in order to make ends meet, by racist teachers in the education system, by just a low-quality education system. The school that's 4 blocks from my house in Minneapolis only has 200 students because there are hardly any teachers. They don't have any extracurriculars. If you want to play sports, you actually have to take a bus to the school 40 blocks away and be on their teams. So you have no school pride and like just being proud of where you come from. They don't have any like modern languages. They don't have any art classes. I mean, all the things that make kids want to go to school, they don't have any of that. And actually, I had a chance to mentor a handful of the girls in my neighborhood. And when I first got there 5 years ago, I had a bunch of seniors who were like these amazing girls who, despite that environment, despite the fact that they went to a school that was like actively not helping them learn, they still had their eye on college, and they were just these unbelievable, visionary young girls. And I met them their senior year, and they were ready to apply to college. And the problem was, when we looked at their transcript, it became clear, and this was news to them, but I know this because I'm a college professor. What we discovered is that they had done everything they needed to do in order to graduate from that high school. This gets me every time. But what they needed to graduate from that high school was very different than what you need to get into a 4-year college. And they had fought the system all by themselves for 4 years. And they didn't have the credits needed to even apply to a school like Spring Arbor. Because their school didn't offer the classes that you need to apply to a school like Spring Arbor. That's the reality, is that if we end up at places like Spring Arbor, really good liberal arts colleges, it's because you've had support that's helped you along the way. Do you know that college graduates in the United States are only 30% of the adult population? And worldwide, it's less than 1% of the adult population in the world. Those of us who are in this room, who are getting a college degree or have a college degree, are extremely privileged. We've had opportunities and will continue to have opportunities that people can only dream of in this country, much less worldwide. And so we are invited, and we're going to talk more specifically about how to think about this in the next session, but we are invited to follow in Jesus' footsteps, have the same attitude that Jesus had, and to not think of equality with our college-educated peers, or with our Western peers, or our middle-class peers, or our white peers or whatever it is that we kind of, the group that we identify with that kind of makes life good for us. We're being invited, if we want to be part of this unifying process, to really examine how can we be like Jesus, who did not think of equality with God as something to cling to, rather he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. Jesus understood that divisions often occur across power differences. Jesus understood that it wasn't just us versus him on an equal plane. He understood that he had more power than us, and if he was going to be united with us, it was going to cost him something. And I think for those of us who are part of this conversation, particularly in this room where people have some amount of privilege, now it's going to vary because there's some diversity in this room, but just based on education, which is the example that I use, we can all say, this is something we have to think about, right? If we're going to go out and be unified with other people, if we can't just talk about perception, we can't just talk about self-esteem, we also have to talk about power. And who has it, who has access to influence, who's going to be more likely to get the job, who's going to be more likely to be taken seriously, who's going to be more likely to get votes if we run for office, and what do we need to do in order to be part of the healing process. And I think that what we're invited into is the best journey possible. And there's a lot of hope there, but first we have to be aware. So when I come back, we'll have an opportunity to talk about what does awareness look like and then some next steps, practically and theologically. How do we need to be thinking about ourselves and how do we need to be interacting with other people as we seek to have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. All right, let me pray for us before we take a break, and then we'll be back here at 7:30. Is that right? Okay. God, I thank you for this opportunity to come before you and to keep growing and challenging ourselves. I thank you for who we are here in this room. I thank you that we are on a journey that you've put us on, that we're here at Spring Arbor today, some of us as students, some of us as professors, some of us as community members, but you designed for us to be here, and you have good plans for our being here. There's no shame in being here. There's no shame in acknowledging that we have opportunities that others don't have, but God, we invite you to show us how we can be part of your plan for making things right, for creating opportunities for all to enjoy, and not just a select few. May we be encouraged and also challenged by you, Holy